I don't know how you've engaged with the Psalms in the past, or as we've read through them in the new year, but I found the Psalms, and I've always been one of those people who's grown up in church, and they've been around. I don't know if you can engage with them like that. They're just around, aren't they? You walk into someone's house and you're like, oh, there's a psalm stuck on the fridge. It's not the whole psalm, it's the nice bit of the psalm. And that's what I found I've loved about them. The Psalms hold in perfect tension the truth of who God is and the reality of real life. The Psalms meet in a really awkward way when you want to write a nice thing in someone's card when they're in hospital, because we love the idea of saying all the nice things that they say. But then we have to wrestle with the bits where they ask God to stone our enemies. And that doesn't work as well in someone's get well soon card. But in the Psalms, we see this tension held together whereby God is still good and life is still hard. And those two things can come together and be true at the same time. And the Psalms express that beautifully. They speak into the reality of life that in many ways other parts of the Bible can't do. They speak into the reality of how somebody, the writer, is experiencing both the absolute trust in God and the absolute reality there are people that want to kill them. And we see through these expressions, these poems and these songs, that truth poured out beautifully. As I said, they hold that tension, and I think in many ways they allow us to hold that tension too. A reality that our lives aren't maybe as we'd like them to be. And yet God is still good, still present. The psalm we're going to look at today is no different. It tackles things slightly differently, but it still brings together these wonderful tensions that we see around us. So I'm going to invite Louisa to come and read Psalm 29 for us. Thank you, Louisa.
Ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon leap like a calf, Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. The voice of the Lord shakes the desert. The Lord shakes the desert of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord twists the oaks and strips the forests bare, and in his temple all cry, glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord is enthroned as king forever. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace.
Thank you. An incredible psalm, a psalm that highlights just how big and how powerful God is. Uses incredible language, uses contextual language, and what it does amazingly for us is it brings some of the Old Testament readings that we're doing smack bang into the middle of both 2025, where 2026, a year's changed since I started making these notes, 2026, and where we are in our New Testament readings now. Movies, work with me here, movies are full of Easter eggs. Not chocolate Easter eggs, but they are full of Easter eggs, moments that tell a story that isn't the story of the movie, but is something for people who are fans of the movie or the series or the franchise will pick up on. And Pixar is no different. It's said, you'd have to ask Nigel to clarify this, that every Pixar movie has a foretell, a moment in it which will tell you what the next movie is going to be. Every movie is loaded with interesting and connections from previous movies. An Easter egg is something that subtly points to something else. Its role is that to set something up for the viewer to observe. You don't necessarily notice it. You might not be aware of it. But it is there to help you understand something deeper is going on. And that's what we see in this incredible psalm today. We read this in verse 3. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. But then we read it again in verse 4, twice. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. Again, the voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. The voice of the Lord shakes the deserts. And then once more in verse 9, the voice of the Lord twists the oaks and strips the forest bare. David is planting a beautiful Easter egg for us that we aren't told of unless we spot it. The voice of the Lord is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in this incredible psalm. 7 times the Lord speaks, and we see the power of his voice in this psalm. In Genesis we read, and God said, "Let there be light." And God said, "Let there be a vault." And God said, "Let water under the skies be gathered." And God said, "Let there be light in the vault of the sky." And God said, "Let the waters teem with living creatures." And God said, "Let us make mankind in our image." And in my defense, God doesn't say anything specifically on day 7, but the Easter egg is there for all to see. David is reminding his readers that the God that he is writing about is the God of creation, the all-powerful God. Not only is the language powerful, but the Easter egg is clear for all to see. David is connecting, even through the use of the words, back to the God of Genesis, the God of creation. David is creatively reminding us of the sheer power of God. The God who was in creation. The God who created all that we see around us is subtly pointed towards just through the way that this psalm is built. What David is doing is fully aligning God as the center of all things, the God of all creation. He is bringing the focus 100% in on God. A wonderful psalm, this poem, this expression isn't simply emotions-led now. It's deeply rooted with a profound understanding of who God is. God's power is spoken of. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. But it's also implied through those wonderful Easter eggs, that 7 repetitions of the voice of the Lord. Reminds us of the God who said, "Let there be light," and there was light. David is embedding this truth through the clever interplay of his words. And this is important for us to grasp because David needs the readers to be fully aware of just how big God is. Because this psalm, as I said, does 3 things. It roots itself in the past. It is written speaking directly into the specific and is in many senses a prophecy of what is yet to come. And David captures all of this in these 11 verses because David is writing this psalm at a curious time. He's writing it at a time where we need to remember 2 things. 1, it was real life. So while David is writing, people are going about their daily business. People will be washing clothes and setting their boats out to fish. People may be pressing grapes for wine. Some will be hanging washing on the line. Others planting crops. Real life was happening. And if real life was happening, we have to remember that there would have been real life pressure. A reality upon these people. And the way that they expressed and the way that they dealt with this pressure was that they would understand, if I plant these crops, they need rain to grow. And the rain comes from the clouds, and so therefore somebody, something has to be making the rain come. And suddenly their lives were littered with these small g gods whom they would worship. You read far more of this when Paul begins to tackle it on his journey around. But we see this moment where we have people desperately trying to understand the process of nature and therefore worshiping these small g gods. And I believe David in this psalm is writing directly against one of these small g gods. There would have been countless people around who worshipped Baal, the god, little g, of the heavens, was how he was described. He was also described as he who rides on the clouds. Baal was worshipped as the god of creation, the god who was in control of the weather, of the storms, who would bring about the rain. This was who people would turn to if they needed safe travel across waters. As I said, we've looked back at that amazing interplay of those 7 voices of the Lord, but David writes right into the moment that the people are living in. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord is enthroned as king forever. David is quite simply asking the reader, who do you trust? I take your Baal and I present you my God. My God, whom I'll just remind you, was the creator of the earth. David is asking a very deliberate question. You are worshipping Baal, but listen to who my God is. My God is the God of creation of all of the earth. He alone is all powerful. He is the Lord over the waters. He is the Lord of the lightning, of the floods, of the thunder, and over the mighty waves. David is not so subtly highlighting that Baal is a small g God compared to his God. But we have to remember the people of the time were hearing this when that was how they expressed things. That's how they understood things. And David is writing directly against that. What an incredible thing for David to be able to write, knowing that there were people who would have been looking to other avenues for the control of the weather, to bring about rain, to stop the winds. What I find fascinating about this psalm is that it begins to get even better for those of us sat here today. Backwards, we had that incredible reminder that God is the God of all creation. In the present, as David writes, we have that not so subtle reminder that God is God, and he is the God of all creation and nature. And then we have this incredible moment where David prophesies for us and brings about this incredible moment of foretelling. Mark 4:35-41 reads like this. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. So the disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the winds, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the winds died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." Who is this? That even the winds and the waves obey him. This is Jesus, the Son of God. The Word at the beginning. Jesus is the authority over the storms and over nature. Jesus' actions with David's psalm and the Genesis account simply remind us that this is God incarnate, the three in one. Only one can calm the terrifying power of the storm, and that is God. And in Mark, we read that Jesus calms the storm, re-emphasizing Jesus is God. Jesus does over the waters what the voice of the Lord did in the Old Testament, showing complete control of nature. The storms of nature can be calmed at the voice of Jesus. It leaves them with that question, who is this? And the only answer we can have is this is Jesus. This is God incarnate, the God who spoke creation into being, who showed his power as a mighty pillar of light as he led his people, who speaks and the winds and the waves obey. It's an incredible picture that we have painted in this psalm of looking back at who God is, talking about how powerful God is in the moment that David's writing, and then we see this wonderful truth of Jesus being in that position, to speak over the storm and calm it. I said at the beginning, I love the Psalms. They hold together perfectly this tension that, if I'm honest, far more reflects my life than some of those heroic stories we read in the Bible. Because it's all very well, Tim, to be stood there telling us all of these wonderful things. Brilliant for you to be able to capture the Old Testament and where David's writing from in the New Testament, but it doesn't work for me. It's not the reality of my life. David finishes with this: the Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. I want you to consider for a moment, if Jesus can speak into the winds and the waves and bring them to calm, do you trust him that he can show that kind of power in your life? Do you trust him enough to believe that he can be involved in all the things of your life? Do you trust him enough that he can calm the storms of your life? For many of us sat here this morning, he has already shown this power. This incredible power over creation, amazingly, is just a gentle reminder of the power that he has. Because whilst we might be caught in awe, as the disciples were at this amazing moment where Jesus speaks over the storms and they calm, that is only a glimpse of his power when you consider that he has the power that raised me, a sinner, from the depths of death to a new life in him. The power he has is immeasurable when we consider the work of the cross. If you are asked, who is this, in regards to some wind and some rain, what on earth do you begin to articulate as the question to ask when he brings a prodigal home? When a lost sheep is found? When my sin and shame was hung on that cross, how do you articulate the question of who is this when he has done all that for me? Jesus is the voice that saves us. He is the king of the storm. There is no tempest he cannot calm, and no grave he cannot empty. Who is this? Whatever it is that you are facing, whatever it is, there is nothing off the table when I say whatever it is you are facing. Remember that, as this psalm reminds us, the God of creation is the Jesus of the storm and the Holy Spirit of your right now. And you can trust him with all things. You can trust him with all things.